One of the first mitzvahs in the Torah. It's actually this week's PARSHA, Parsha's Bo. It also happens to be, I guess, Chinese New Year, that's what the paper says. But as we'll see, the Chinese claim to follow the lunar calendar. And we follow the lunar calendar. How come we have different New Years? I can't help you on that one, but I have to check into that more. But the Torah tells us there's a mitzvah of sanctifying the moon. Rosh Chadashim. We have the mitzvah, we know, of following the lunar cycle. In other words, the calendar most work with January, February, March. That's the solar calendar. And that's 365 days in a year and change. The lunar calendar is 354 days a year. And therefore, we have a problem. So in fact, the Arabs or the Muslims, they follow just the lunar calendar. I'm not sure about the Chinese. But they follow strictly lunar. So therefore, I was always wondering, it was one time I was watching the basketball playoffs, not football, the NBA, and this born-again Muslim, Hakeem Olajuwon, who was a center, a very good player. He, I guess, converted at some point in his career, changed his name. And I was watching the game once, and they said he's fasting today because it must have been a day game because they only fast during the day. And he said because it's Ramadan. And I'm thinking, like, what's going on here? I've been watching sports since I was young. I don't remember. I was watching him last year, the year before. I don't remember him fasting. And I was thinking, oh yeah, of course, it's a lunar calendar. That if you follow a lunar calendar, there are no seasons. Of course, you have spring, winter, fall. That still doesn't change. But your holidays or your holy days don't fall out on any set calendar. In other words, Ramadan could fall out in September. It could fall out in June. It could fall out in January, and it does. Eventually, it's going to come out, and it will fall out any time. So if you follow a lunar calendar, you have a problem with the holidays being in a certain season. It's not a problem for anyone else. It's only a problem for us because the Torah also tells us Passover has to be in the springtime, Sukkot has to be in the fall time. So it's a problem. If we only follow a lunar calendar, we can't keep the holidays in its season. So really interesting, what we do is we have a kind of like a solar year, but a lunar month. In other words, the new year begins Rosh Hashanah, but actually the first month of the year is like Passover. It's actually split up that way. But in other words, we have what we call a solar correction, meaning it's already set up in the calendar. We don't have to do anything. I think it's 7 times every 19 years. So a little under 3 times it's a little under every third year. We add a new month. A leap year in Judaism isn't like one day like February 29th, but we add 29 days to the year. So in other words, on a normal cycle year we have 354 days, and in a leap year we have 383 days. And we do that 7 times every 19 years, so you'll end up with the seasons, the holidays being in the season. That's why you'll notice that Hanukkah. So this year Hanukkah fell out at the end of December, but next year it's going to be in the beginning of December because now we just had the leap year, and then it goes back. There's basically a 3-4 week stretch where any Jewish holiday could come out. Like Rosh Hashanah sometimes could be the beginning of September, or it could be the end of September. It all depends on what cycle we're in. So therefore, even though we follow a lunar calendar, but we also are true to the seasons as well. So I just say, it's really tongue-in-cheek I'm saying this, but it should come out then that Muslims, Arabs should live longer than, let's say, Jews or people who follow the solar calendar, because, well, I figure it out. Let's say 11 days a year times 70. I don't know, what does that come out to?
770.
Yeah, so I'm saying it's like 2 years. So in theory, I never did a test. If you want to do a PhD on it, you could check into it. That in theory they should live longer because they're not living any longer, but they're older because they have shorter years. But that's is tongue-in-cheek. So either way, so we have those. We have 350. So that's what we do. We have 354 days on a normal year. On a leap year, we have 383. So it'd be a lot easier if we just followed the solar calendar, because everything is it's much more complex following the lunar, and that's why based and then it's already decided already. They had to get their act together. Our calendar set already. We already know. I'll tell you when. If I have a calendar, I'll tell you when Rosh Hashanah is next year, the year after. We don't have to do anything. All the leap years are set. It was very complicated. Something even Nassau, was trying to figure out. Hillel Hasheni, the great rabbis, already had it worked out. So we know. So Jews have been obsessed with the moon from biblical times. We have to follow. We sanctify the moon, and we went ahead. And when the moon came out, we made it the New Year. In fact, we know the famous day on the secular calendar. Anyone know? July 20th, 1969. July 20th, 1969. One of the greatest technological achievements happened.
On the moon?
You got it. That on July 20th, it was a good guess since we're talking about...
I wasn't here.
Yeah.
You weren't born yet?
I was, but I was due.
Oh, I was 7. So...
Were you here yet?
No, I was negative. I don't know.
Were you here yet?
Right.
I was born in 1986.
So what happened was on July 20th, 1969 but they set the foot on the moon, and then they say 6 hours after the initial landing at 4:17, we know Neil Armstrong, he took a small step off this lunar and when he went onto the moon, and he famously said, that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. In other words, it was a small step, but for mankind getting... So long before NASA's fascination with the moon, Judaism's already been there and done that. We've already been discussing the moon for a long time. And the question is, why is it? It would be much simpler just to go with the solar calendar. Why do we basically combine both? We follow the lunar, but basically we combine... We're probably the only ones who combine both. Either the secular calendar just goes solar, others just go lunar, and we basically combine solar and lunar. So why is it, what's the significance of the moon, and why do we combine both the lunar and the solar calendar? So...
Well, we start our Yontos and our Shabbos is based on the rise of the moon.
But right, so all our Yom Tov...
the sunset, the moon rise, all at the same time.
No, right, but I'm saying it, but what I was saying is like this, the difference between Yonta, meaning the holidays like Passover, Sukkot, Shavuos, what blessing do we make? We say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Makadesh Yisrael B'Hazmanim. It's the Jewish people who sanctify the holidays. When it comes to Shabbos, it's Makadesh HaShabbos. In other words, Shabbos has inherent sanctity that no matter what we like it or not, 6 days a week, it's six days. It's a week. It's considered weekdays. But come like it or not, the 7th Friday night at sunset, Shabbos comes whether we like it or not, whether we do anything. That's something already inherent. It's 6 days of creation, the 7th day. In theory, today we have calendars, but in theory, the holiday didn't come until the Jewish people sanctified. That's a fundamental difference between the sanctity of the holidays and the sanctity of Shabbos. That's very interesting. What do we do every Friday night when we come to shul? Before we do evening service, what do we say before evening service? It's called Kabbalah Shabbos. We bring in the Shabbos to say Friday Night Live. Many people do Kalbach or Chaldodi, or Chun and the whole works. So how come it's interesting? But every Friday night we say the service, the Kabbalah Shabbos. Why don't we have something similar to Yontif? And when we bring in Passover, bring in Sukkot, why don't we have a Kabbalah Yontif service? obviously don't say the same thing, but say the Psalms which are appropriate to the Yontif. So why do we only have it on Shabbos and not on Yontif? So there are many answers, but one answer is this fundamental difference. One answer is this, they point out, Rav Soloveitchik explains, is because the difference between Shabbos and Yontif is on Yontif, we have a commandment to go to the temple. 3 times a year, Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuos, we owe a regal, we go up to the temple in Jerusalem. So we're going to God's house. But on Shabbos, so to speak, similarly, God comes to us. We bring in the divine presence. So therefore, that's one distinction. So therefore, they point out that Shabbos, which comes by itself, it's inherent. So therefore, we want to go ahead and bring it in, so at least we could have a token acceptance. But by Yontif, by definition, it's here only because we brought it. There's no need. It's redundant. We don't have to have a Kabbalah's Yontif because Yontif comes only because we brought it. There's no need to have the special preparation prayer. But on Shabbos, we're coming because God created the world on 6 days, rested on 7. So therefore, we need to have this preparation. We have this preparation. So getting back, so why is it that we combine both the solar and lunar, and why does the lunar have special significance? So what's the difference between the sun and the moon? There are many differences, but one difference is that we know there's even a song, sunrise, sunset. We all know, it's very simple. We know where to find the sun. We know where to go look for sunrise, and we know where to look for sunset. But when the moon, try finding the moon at night. Half the month it's not visible to us. And the other half, even when it is, especially in the winter, it's hard to be trying to find it behind the clouds. But you don't know where to look. It's over there. It's waxing bigger. It's smaller. It's always on the move. What does the sun signify? What does the moon symbolize? The sun symbolizes stability. We all know everyone has to have a roof over their head. They need food on the table. You need the basics of life. Everyone has to have some routine they have. And of course, if you only have a routine, you do the same thing every day, you have the same muffins every day or the same food every day. We're all creatures of habit, but we also like variety. So when you get tired of anything, no matter how good it is, you have it all the time, we like change. So that's what the moon, it's nice to go on a camping trip, a vacation, but if you're going on a camping trip, 354 days a year, or 365 days a year, or 383 days a year, whichever year we're talking about, you can't have a life like that. It's okay to take breaks and vacation, but that can't be your whole thing. So in Judaism, we recognize both. We recognize the importance of stability. You have to have a roof over your head. You have to have food on the table. On the other hand, doing the same thing all the time will lead to a life of boredom. And therefore, the moon represents creativity and change. And that's why we have to combine both. On one hand, we need the stability of the sun, but we also need the creativity of the moon. And in fact, that's what in Judaism does. We combine both the physical and the spiritual. In other words, like in certain religions, basically they shun the physical, and they say only, go into a monastery, go away from people, go away from food. In Judaism, it's just the opposite. In fact, and we have a Jerusalem Talmud which says after 120 years, God's going to ask you, did you visit Niagara Falls? I heard you talk about the Swiss Alps. If you lived there, did you go to the Swiss Alps? Or whatever, did you enjoy life? Judaism wants you to enjoy life. And in fact, there's a famous person in Israel, and if you heard of him, Uri Zohar. He wrote many books. He used to be an anti-dati, anti-religious, and he later became religious, and he's actually, I don't know if he's a rabbi or not, but he goes to discos and jails trying to get people to be more observant. And he wrote many books. So one of his books he wrote, he's trying to understand, because he used to be not only non-observant, but he was anti. And he was trying to figure out, how come I hated these Orthodox Jews so much? He writes, like, I can never figure it out. Like, it wasn't like, okay, so I hate a lot of people. It wasn't just, well, I don't even hate priests as much, or, it wasn't just because they were religious figures. Why did I have this in my heart? And then he finally, the light bulb went on, and he said to him, I figured out why. Because you know why? Because when I was non-observant, so I said, you know what, okay, I don't believe in this stuff. I don't believe in religion. I don't believe in the next world. Okay, you could do whatever you want. You believe in the next world, you could, I don't care. You could sacrifice, do what you want. So we see someone in the monastery, people not getting married, sacrificing. That's okay. I'm okay with that because I have this world. I don't believe in next world. You could have your next world. But I look at these observant Jews and I see they seem to have both worlds. They seem to be enjoying this world pretty much. They seem to eat well. They seem to enjoy the good stuff. At the same time, they think they're getting rewarded in the next world also. And that's what Judaism is all about. We combine both. It's makadesh techol. We take the everyday stuff and we sanctify it. And we take the wine, and we don't get drunk on New Year's, on Rosh Hashanah, but we take the wine every simcha, every joyous occasion, every Friday night, every Yontiv, we do it over a cup of wine. Because there's a famous medrash I always like saying over, that when Noah came out of the ark, so he planted the vineyards and where the wines came out of. So one of the angels came down to Noah and said to him, let's make a pact. And they went ahead and they slaughtered 4 animals. A lamb, a lion, a monkey, and a pig, in that order. So what's the significance of those 4 animals with the vineyard, with wine? So our rabbis explain, they say, our rabbis were well aware of the dangers of wine. They said, you drink a little bit to the excess, you become as sleepy as a lamb. You drink a little more, you become as fearless as a lion. You drink a little more to the excess, you start jumping around like a monkey. And you drink totally to the excess, you start acting like a pig, vomiting, throwing up, cursing, the works. Our rabbis were well aware of the dangers of wine. In fact, they tell us, why is wine red? Obviously because it comes from those grapes, but because it can lead to bloodshed. And when a drunk driving, when a person's under the influence, a lot of terrible things could happen. And yet, even though they were well aware of the dangers of wine, every Friday night, every Yontif, every joyous occasion, every simcha, every circumcision, pidyon abed, every time we do something, we do it over a bottle of wine. Because in Judaism, it's the holy and not yet holy. It's everything has a purpose. If God put it in the world, it's our job to benefit from it and to enjoy it. And that's why, we're always looking for the balance of the solar and the lunar, the sun and the moon, the balance, we're all born with a body and a soul. So a monkey could be happy eating bananas all day. We can't be. Human beings can't be happy just indulging in our pleasures. I mean, it might be fun in the beginning. Whether you get sick of it in a couple of hours, couple of weeks, couple of years, couple of decades, wherever it hits you, but a person's feeling unfulfilled because you have a soul, you have a mission, you have something more to it. Because not only do you have to fulfill your bodily needs, which we recognize you do have to. That's why we believe you do get married, you do enjoy the physical things in life, you have the good foods. On Shabbos, Yontiv, we have all the festive meals. Life is there for the enjoyment, but of course there's always everything in moderation. As Nachmanides points out, one could be what they call a menuvel b'rshus haTorah. You could be a disgusting person with permission from the Bible. In other words, I could eat everything kosher, I'll buy only kosher wine, but I'll sit there drinking wine, getting drunk every day. I'll just have my 25 steaks and ribs. You could do everything, nothing wrong technically, but you're not living a holy life as well. So besides following the laws, the ethical laws, you also have to live a holy life. And therefore we have to combine both the physical and the spiritual. That's what Judaism is all about. And that's as well the same concept. We combine both the solar and the lunar. We go ahead. Of course we need stability, but we can't go around and being bored the rest of our life doing the same thing. We have to, as they say today, got it from us, that people recreate their business like Rim's trying to do. The market wasn't buying into it today, at least in the early markets it was up. At the end of the day, I think it closed down. I guess they don't believe that they're actually changed anything. They just put a figurehead in charge, etc. So I guess we'll see if they actually, maybe they think it's worse now because now, if this is the change, then that's it. They think nothing's going to happen. But who knows? We'll see how it plays out. But everyone's trying to recreate them. So that's what they have to do. That's what Apple did. All the great companies, IBM, and that's what Kodak didn't do apparently. But they had the opportunity with the digital cameras. I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, and they stuck to film, whatever the mistake was. Let the experts talk about it when they're giving the classes on what not to do and what to do. But a person always has to, so that's not only the business, that's one thing as well, but everyone has to recreate themselves personally. You always have to look for new things because that's human nature. We get used to things and we take things for granted, and we always have to, something always has to feel new, how to study more or how to pray with more intent. If it's the same thing all the time, you have to do things differently, whether it's business, going out doing things, any relationship, you always have to find new things. And that's what it's all about. That's what's symbolic of the sun and the moon. On one hand, you have to have the basics, the stability, but you also need the new things. That's why we combine both. But what's the significance of the moon? So that's what our rabbis tell us. What do we say? The moon is constantly waning larger, bigger, small. It's in and out. We see it, we don't see it. Unfortunately, it's symbolic of Jewish history. That on one hand, sometimes during the temple times or times the Jewish people are very large, they're a dominant factor in the world. Then the cycle goes, they start waning, the destruction of the temple, the anti-Semites trying to destroy us, and there are times where people say that's it. The Jews are going to disappear. That's Mark Twain, his famous line. And he writes about it. What happened to all these great nations, the Romans, the Greeks, the Babylonians, and this tiny little nation, the Jewish people, that's still around. That's the greatest, in fact, that's the greatest proof of God, the fact that the Jews are still around. What tiny percentage are we of the world, and yet, besides the influence and the Nobel Prize and all the things that we contributed, the fact we're still around. In fact, one of the great rabbis in the Talmud, two rabbis were talking, and in the Talmud, their allusion, there are like 70 nations who try to destroy the Jewish people, and then, so symbolically, the 70 wolves are the 70 nations, and the sheep is the Jewish nation. So one rabbi said to another, look how great is this sheep. The sheep was able to survive 70 wolves running around trying to attack the sheep. Look how amazing the sheep is, it survived. And the rabbi said, you got it all wrong. It's not how great is the sheep. It's how great is the shepherd. It's the one who directed the sheep. It's the God in heaven who directed the Jews around, and that's the greatness. And that's what the Jewish people are symbolic of the moon. There'll be times it looks like we're disappearing, and all of a sudden we come out with shining on the moon at night. It seems to be disappearing. All of a sudden it comes out again. It's waning, bigger, larger. The moon represents historically the plights of the Jewish people. That's the Jewish history. We're going to have the cycles, where there are going to be up cycles and down cycles, and that's why the moon, we represent the moon as well, because the moon also comes out at night. Nighttime is known as a time of golus, of exile, and usually bad things happen at night. But why not also the point being the moon at night shines light, and therefore we see it. So one symbolism of the moon is the moon represents change, and that's symbolically the Jewish people constantly waning in and out, that type of change. The second thing about the moon is the fact that the moon doesn't produce its own light. It's merely a reflection from the light generated by the sun. And it's teaching us a very crucial idea. We don't always have to be original. You don't have to be, the different ways of being creative without being original. But you don't have to, especially like people think they have to come up with a new insight, the fourth, may be published or perish, or they have to do things. But in Judaism, recognize the moon. The moon could be a reflection of the sun, but that's okay also. You don't have to necessarily be, every person has their own abilities, and saying over stuff from the old, taking old things and creating them to new, that's also a tremendous thing. And that's what they point out. And who was the greatest student of Moses? Moses' greatest student was Joshua. Joshua wasn't the brightest, wasn't the smartest, he wasn't the most knowledgeable. He had many other students. But Joshua, they say, he was like the moon. He just reflected off the sun. He reflected off his leader Moses. And that's why Moses chose Joshua, because he was a reflection, because in terms of continuing the traditions from Har Sinai. And therefore he felt very comfortable with Joshua, and therefore he continued in. That's the second explanation. So one is the creativity, one is the fact that the Jewish people represent the moon constantly waning bigger and smaller. Then you have the moon as a reflection of the sun. And then you have a third explanation, very interesting. If you look in Genesis, in the beginning, 1:16, when on the fourth day, when we talk about the creation of the moon and the sun, so the Torah calls it the Ma'oros HaGedolim, the great luminaries. It refers to the sun and moon as the great luminaries. What's interesting, in the same exact verse, which talks about the sun and moon as the great luminaries, it also talks about the stars. Yet the stars does not get that special mention of great luminaries. So the question is, why? Why is it that the sun and moon, the Torah calls it great luminaries, but the stars don't? In fact, the Ibn Ezra, one of the medieval commentators and commentator on the Bible, strengthens the question. In fact, we all know now that most of the stars are even bigger than the moon. The moon is smaller than the stars. So how can it be? The stars are so big, you think they'd be called the big luminaries. But yet the sun and the moon get the status of luminaries, not the stars. So what's the explanation?
Well, from Earth perspective,
yeah,
they have the greatest effect on the planet. The lunar cycle pulls the tides, and the sun helps to create life.
They're very good, yeah.
Right, that's what they were put there for us to use, right? During what would be night without the moon? It's a source of light. It's a reflection of the sun, so it kind of reminds us of what we did during the day, but now it's nighttime and we can reflect upon that, and we don't have to work as hard, we can relax because it's not as bright out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now this quote from the Ibn Ezra, as this article from Rav David Gottlieb, but I'll just read this one paragraph. He says it very nicely. So why is the moon left out? Why does the moon get to call the great luminary, yet the stars much bigger? So he says like this, he says, the reference here isn't to size, but to the benefit provided. The star's vast distance from Earth, the physical size notwithstanding, severely reduces the amount of light they provide to Earth. The moon, by contrast, shines brightly in the nighttime sky. Despite being smaller than the stars, the moon deserves the title Great Luminary because of the profound and positive impact it has on the Earth. See, today we live in the city, so we don't appreciate how much light the moon gives us. But you live out in the farmland, out in the country land, it really gets pitch dark. If I'm out in the Catskills, and when the moon comes out, you really appreciate the light. And that's what the Ibn Ezra is saying is, that it's a profound lesson for us. Real greatness isn't measured by strength, by intelligence, by wealth, but it's by using our abilities to shine and make a difference in the world. It's true the star is much bigger, but so what? What benefit is the stars giving to the world that they're so big? The big, I wouldn't say they're useless, but so what? They're not doing us much good. The moon, which is much smaller, but it provides a tremendous benefit, and that's the lesson. Providing light where there was none light previously transforms a person from merely being a star to a luminary. How do you make that jump from a star to a luminary? A star might be bright and big, but to be a luminary you have to give benefit to others. You have to shine light, and of course symbolically a person might have a lot of money, he might have a lot of potential how to help other people, but if it stays within, it's meaningless. It's the person who goes out and helps people with whatever potential they have. They give with their money, they help others, they give charity, do other things. That's how you go from a star to a luminary. So the moon might be smaller, but we just think by how much benefit they benefit humankind, and that's the significance of the moon. So to summarize, we discussed the importance the Torah tells us. HaChozah Rosh Chadashim, the mitzvah of sanctifying the moon, the mitzvah, we go by the lunar calendar, and we have a leap year, and others just go by strictly lunar or strictly solar. We combine both, because on one hand, the holidays have to be in the seasons, but on the other hand, we follow the lunar, and that's why we have a leap year. We add 29 days, we do it 7 times every 19 years. And why do we combine both the solar and lunar? Because that's what Judaism is all about, combining, number one, solar represents stability, moon is creativity, we need both, and therefore that's the body and the soul, with the combination we take the wine, even though we know it's dangerous to drink and drive, but we take the wine and we use it for our simchas. Someone who is drunk and just keeps on drinking, it's going to lead to helpless abandon. You're depressed, you're going to get more depressed. But someone who's besimcha, someone who's in joy and wants to add another benefit, and therefore you drink the wine. In fact, the rabbis tell us one of the reasons for the creation of wine is to comfort the mourner. In fact, the Susan, it says the Brisker Rav, who used to drink on Purim, used to say his best Torah is when you drink wine, it brings out your inside. So if your inside is better than your outside, then you should be drinking and letting your inside out. But in terms of combining both the physical and the spiritual, that's what we combine the solar and lunar. And the different messages of those lunar is, the lunar represents the history of the Jewish people, waning bigger and smaller. On one hand, it looks like we're going to be destroyed and we come back out shining large. Secondly, moon is a reflection of the sun. And Joshua was the greatest Talmud of Moses. He wasn't the smartest, wasn't the greatest, but he was able to transmit the tradition because he reflected off his Rabbi Moshe. And thirdly, the moon gets the status of a luminary and not the star, which is much bigger, because God doesn't judge by size. We judge by how much benefit you give to mankind, and that's our lesson in life. The more a person gives, how do we reach the level from turning from star to luminary? The more light we shine on other people, the more chesed, the more acts of loving kindness we do to others, that's how we become a luminary.